So I'll go straight in. The WPATH standards of care were never like any other clinical guideline. The Endocrine Society recommended the use, and does recommend the use, of puberty blockers on the basis of low quality or very low quality evidence according to their own grading system. And they've had that since, I think, 2011. We've always known. CAS, after 4 years of an independent review, has found exactly the same, as we should have known. If it wasn't clear before, back in 2017, it became obvious that WPATH are first and foremost an activist lobby. And that year, the USPATH conference in Los Angeles cancelled the second scheduled talk by Kenneth Zucker, and he was the most experienced clinician and researcher in the area. After his first talk was disrupted by activists, he then demanded a meeting, and WPATH and USPATH bowed to the activists. His second talk was cancelled, and the board posted apologies. And if you saw the videos of that conference's evening gala, it's typical of scenes that we see. Trans activists were celebrating their win, demanding that WPATH change, and that the standards of care change to affirm transgender identities as completely normal. And so the videos really show that this is no normal patient advocacy group. These are activists. There are parallels, I think, with the opioid scandal. In that case, a pharmaceutical company employed salespeople to conduct a hard sell of a painkiller they claimed was not addictive. And that's very reminiscent, I think, of the trans activist groups online and going into schools and directly targeting children to sell gender identity, the concept of gender identity, to school children. In the case of opioids, they made up a new condition they called breakthrough pain, and they claimed there was a research study proving the drug was safe and effective. They told doctors that prescribing the drug was the only responsible way to alleviate the patient's pain. It was kindness to administer it and cruelty to withhold it. Where have we heard that before? And of course, there wasn't actually a research study that proved it was safe. And one of the parallels is that they claimed only 1% of people became addicted, which is like the 1% they say that the regret rate is. So you can see the parallels, but I think there is a difference, that transgender is not a medical diagnosis at all. The word refers to a political cultural group, and it was founded on a belief in a kind of gendered soul. And it was created through social control, including the mass indoctrination of children and the silencing and punishment of any dissent. And this, I think, we haven't seen before. So affirming a girl as a boy or a boy as a girl was almost unheard of a decade ago. And persistence rates under the approach of watchful waiting, where children weren't affirmed and socially transitioned, were much, much lower. So there's no historic precedent for this, and the explosion in the number of adolescents, predominantly girls, suddenly declaring an opposite sex identity. And I just want to take up one point from Cass, because she talks about the fact that social contagion is the most controversial idea, and she doesn't really go into it much. But she actually does include quite a lot about the social and cultural environment that this generation is growing up in, and how it's different to previous generations, and the ways in which it's potentially more difficult. And she mentions another social contagion that happened during lockdown, and that was the contagion of ticks. So I've always felt it makes no sense. If we take just this group of the so-called rapid onset girls, it makes no sense to relate this group to historic cases of gender dysphoria. And it certainly makes no sense to link them with older heterosexual cross-dressing men. And the trans umbrella is not a helpful framework to use for this group. So we know that socially transmitted conditions or disorders typically disproportionately affect adolescent girls, and the sudden development of Tourette's-like symptoms among teenage girls during lockdown was linked to social media exposure. It was even referred to as TikTok tics. And it was understood that this was a social contagion. And can you imagine that anybody daring to refer to TikTok trans? In other areas, health, we're allowed to speak freely. We're allowed to explore the issues and see and place conditions where they belong. I think certainly the case of rapid onset girls and some boys as well belongs in the area of social contagion. What we know about that does not belong in the area of trans.